And so here we go. And I told you we were going to look at green pictures, not all of them, but why do we want to plan for a drought? And I've already cited some of them. But I will add to that maybe we ought to think in terms of disaster, not drought. Will the drought be caused because of shut down irrigation, drop in the aquifer, or will it actually be rainfall? Or will it be other disasters? I think back to 2012, some of the disasters people had, and John, I don't know how close to your country any of those bad fires in western Nebraska were, but talk about devastating. And yeah, it was because of dry, but that put a whole new perspective to it. Previous speakers have talked about the forest fires, and that's another aspect of it that goes along with drought, but I think we really need to think of it as a disaster plan, not necessarily just a drought plan, even though that's what this conference is about. It was mentioned, I believe by Gary, that the drought had broken in western South Dakota. Well, I can assure you, there's some of those guys that would rather still be in a drought than what they went through, losing a whole herd of cattle. They definitely are out of drought short term, but the price some of those people paid is beyond imagination. And like I said, at least drought, you have a little reaction time to work on that. So there's a lot of reasons why we need to plan for drought. One of them, and I think we really need to think of in terms of profit, because how are we going to stay in business? How are we going to pay the bills? How are we going to service debt? And I think one of the things that we've learned over the years is we've gone through these droughts, and I like to think of them in those key years, and we saw them on the different cycles this year, and they have been clear up into our area. But 1976 is the one I cut my teeth on. I've been in business for 3 years. We're forced to sell our cow herd down to, I believe it was 78 bred heifers. Didn't put up a bale of hay that year. Didn't raise any feed. A lot of the crops that were planted that spring didn't sprout till the following year. I think of years like 1980, 81, which was brought up. I think of periods from 1998, I believe it was, when we went 12 years and never trickled a drop of water in the creeks. We had periods of moisture where we could grow grass, had some crops occasionally, but if we'd have been relying on surface water for anything, we were out of luck. Everything was dried up, just like the pictures that Gary showed of this area. So that's where we started learning about the importance of a drought plan. To go along with that, then we got into the 1980s, and for any of you guys that were in business in those years, I don't need to explain to you about the economics that were involved in agriculture, but we got hit with another whammy, and we knew we really had to change, and I'm not going to get into those changes, or John wouldn't even get up here yet today, but we will talk about some of them this afternoon, but we had to change. That's all there was to it, or we were financially going to join some of the neighbors that got their sale bills. We soon learned that we needed to add to our diversity and flexibility. And I've got those up there as kind of two different items, and yet I don't know where you draw the line between one or the other, because they do go pretty much hand in hand. This picture was taken in 2012, and if you remember, we were in the D4 category in 2012, and I'll get back to some comments on that. But I just want to point out that even in drought, and of course it does depend on how prolonged, if you go 10 years without a drop of water, obviously you're not going to take a picture like that either. But I'll also guarantee you this was the only green thing, including cornfields, for many miles, and I will get back to that. But anyhow, we need to be sustainable. We need to still be in business when this is done, and then that gets back to the profit side of things and the importance of diversity and flexibility. So what kind of diversity? Well, it's already been brought up. I think we really need to look at our practices, whether it's grass management or farming or water management, whatever. I think we really need to look at the new practices, changing our ways. That's a pretty drastic thought. If you got 10 pivots out there that you rely on to decide someday, well, I'm going to quit irrigating. And yet, may we be forced into that? And I'm not suggesting you should do that tomorrow, but I am suggesting that you start thinking in that direction. Make that a 20-year goal that you can reduce down to less than what Susan says is maybe the requirements for your area or the potential for your area. Or maybe you want to beat everybody to the draw and actually change your management to the point you can do that. I threw this picture of cover crops in there, and again, a lot of this is based on diversity, soil health, just thinking outside the box. And again, if it's so dry you can't get seed to sprout by growing a diversity of crops is maybe not in the question, and yet I challenge you to be thinking about what you could be doing different in your operation. If you don't have any livestock now, maybe you should. Maybe that's going to be the future where you can utilize lower water use crops for livestock. And by the way, if you notice the cattle market lately, not all that bad a business to be in. So as I drive around the country into different states and stuff, I see so much potential to increase the livestock business. And yet it's a lot easier when we're dealing with $8 corn to not fool around with that stuff. But I was impressed how much electric fence I saw around corn stalks and stuff as we drove down yesterday. So just think in terms of what you could be doing to add in different enterprises and mixes. Changes in your grazing. We've traditionally been cow-calf operation. I know a lot of places in the south run cattle on wheat. But one of the things we've done is to add a lot of custom grazing. There's always people looking for custom grazing because they're short on grass themselves or whatever they're grazing. Maybe in the winter time, maybe in the summertime. You guys have got a wealth of winter feed, obviously. But we do it with the agreement that we may not take any cattle at all for the year, but we also have an agreement that specifies that with a 2-week notice those cattle can go home. It's really given us diversity, it's given us flexibility, very important. About enterprise diversity, this is also one of the things we've added in, and trust me, it can get dry enough you can't even raise pheasants. We've run into that. But on the other hand, we have a variety. We hunt sharp-tailed grouse, prairie chicken, pheasants, white-tailed deer. And you know, you don't feel quite so bad about having a field that is not up to par. Maybe those pivots that are kind of a disaster, it's all of a sudden got some value in leaving those because it's feed and protection. It's good use of natural resources. And we use birds as one of the methods that we monitor as far as the kind of job we're doing on the landscape. Soil health. Just can't say enough about it. I'm going to show you another picture, but look at the quality of that soil. And we really need to think about getting this soil health up to where it will produce better on a given amount of water and nutrients we are putting out there. This is an infiltration ring that was done on our place. They put an inch of water on that, and it soaked in 10.1 seconds. Now, when we do get rain, we got to capitalize on it, and we need to hold that water in the soil. And so, soil health, infiltration, will be very key in the future of what we're doing. This happens to be grazing actually corn. This field was hailed, and yet still was like 80 bushel corn. It wasn't worth $8 when we did this, but we actually strip grazed this and look at the body condition of those cows. We save the harvest cost, we save drying cost, we save trucking, we utilize the feed, and we had a lot of snow that year. We needed a feed source. August 3rd, 2012. This happens to be a warm season CRP planting that we purposely use as insurance policies. Again, flexibility, diversity. I won't take a lot of time on that this morning. We'll talk about it more this afternoon. But when you can drop cattle into feed like that, when everything else is gone and dried up in the country, a huge value. What about keeping in mind keeping our next generation on the land? A very valuable reason to have a drought plan. We need to think about the future, not only in our natural resources, but our human resources. And we need to keep people on the land. And it's a part of our drought plan is keeping the next generation on the land. And how about quality of life? The amount of stress that these disasters, and I'll refer to them as disasters again, whether it's drought, the storm that was in western South Dakota, tornadoes that have been referred to, fires, it don't matter, but think of the amount of stress that puts people through, whether it's because of financial reasons or just dealing with it. And a drought plan can just do huge things as far as being able to even that out to where you can deal with it. We've been through a number of them. It's just routine. We've got critical dates, we've got critical actions and timings, and we'll just do it like routine business. It's kind of like going to the bank to renew the note. In fact, I told my banker I wouldn't even do business with somebody that didn't have a drought plan. So that's the kind of value that we place on drought plans, and like I said, we use ours every year. It just depends on for how long and to what degree. Thank you very much.